Hello and welcome to this Q&A with the Fertility Alliance. Today we're joined by Carole Gilling-Smith, who's a fertility consultant and director of the Agora Clinic in Brighton, and we're going to be talking about using donor sperm. So, Carole, when do people use donor sperm? In what circumstances?
So there are many different circumstances. If you're a heterosexual couple, one of the sort of sad things is when your tests show that your male partner has no sperm. And after investigations, you may find that donor sperm is a really good option for you. Other circumstances might be if you're in a same-sex female relationship or trans relationship, you want to use donor sperm because there's two people with ovaries basically. So that's a very common way of using donor sperm, and you can either have one partner having the donor sperm treatment, or you can do something we call shared motherhood, where one partner donates eggs, the other partner will carry the embryo created with donor sperm. And then if you're solo parenting, and we're seeing more and more people coming through in terms of solo motherhood, and you might also be thinking about the future and wanting to preserve embryos created with donor sperm, not quite ready to actually have that pregnancy.
Can donor sperm be used for different types of treatment?
Yes, I mean, once you have donor sperm comes normally frozen in liquid nitrogen in little straws, tiny little straws, and it can be thawed out and used either to inseminate into the uterus, which we call intrauterine insemination or donor sperm insemination, or it can be used in vitro fertilization or IVF, where the embryo is created in the laboratory and the sperm from the donor is thawed out and mixed with eggs that have been collected at egg collection, and we create embryos that can be transferred into the uterus.
So do people actually have to know someone who's willing to donate sperm to them, or does the clinic provide the sperm? How does that bit work?
So this is an important question because how is donor sperm obtained? There are many different ways, and it can be somebody who's actually understands your fertility journey and wants to donate to you and your partner, or and help you, and that works quite well. Or it can be because the clinic has a donor bank or is working with a donor bank or a number of donor banks. So it really depends on your situation. I mean, you have to think very carefully if it's going to be somebody because they're going to be obviously on that journey with you, and you've got to think about the relationship they'll have with you and your future child if they've provided obviously the sperm or the egg part of it. But in the sense of using a bank, there are many banks all over the UK and abroad that can provide donor sperm.
And how are donors actually recruited to give the sperms to these sperm banks?
Well, donors are really special people because they have to think of, coming in, having a medical consultation, and then the further steps they need to take to be able to donate. So the first step for a donor might be that he might respond to an advert, or know about this through friends who've done it, and they would have at the donor sperm bank or at the clinic an initial medical consultation, which will go through their medical history, their family history, trace back to parents and grandparents on both sides, look at their psychological history, psychiatric history, ensure that there are no alarm bells that would concern us that things could be passed on to a future child, or that the donor might not be a suitable person to donate. Obviously, making sure they're in good psychological health is important. They would be looking at their lifestyle as well, making sure that they're not taking, excess alcohol, or they're smokers, or they're not taking recreational or IV drugs. Making sure that they have, the necessary willingness to commit to the process of coming in and donating sperm. And once that step is over, there's normally a rigorous assessment. It's a tick box exercise. So the donor would be, ensure that they haven't had, recent tattoos, or recently traveled to a country that has Zika virus. All these things have to be cross-checked. And then they would go for counseling before they are then fulfilling the necessary medical screening, which would involve a sperm test, which has to be completely normal, and then a sexual health screen, which would cover HIV, hepatitis B, C, syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, CMV. These various tests are very, very rigorously set out by our regulators, the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority, to make sure all donors are screened in the same way and to the very highest standards based on scientific evidence. Once that's done, then they can come forward and they would be providing samples that are processed by the laboratory before being frozen. And then once their last samples are taken, they have to come back 3 months, minimum 3 months, but no earlier and later, to have all the sexual health screening repeated. Some clinics would use 6 months. It depends on the test they use. So you know that the samples are safe to use.
And does donor sperm come from the UK as well as from abroad? And does it make any difference?
Yes, the sperm can come from clinics abroad, but if the clinics are abroad, we have to satisfy ourselves as IVF clinics that they meet the same high standards of screening than the UK clinics. And one of the things that I have to point out that is absolutely stipulated in UK law is that the donors have to be identifiable by the child when the child becomes 18. That's been the law since 2005. So any donors that are coming from clinics abroad, donor banks abroad, have to have given consent that their name and their contact details is kept securely on the HFEA register of donors, so that when the child is 18, they can contact the HFEA and get that identifying information. Otherwise, everything is the same between donor samples from the UK and abroad, and there is no difference in the chances of pregnancy as long as the clinic has checked out that the bank is compliant to the UK regulation and the quality of preparation of the sperm is meeting the high standards we have in the UK. There wouldn't be any difference in outcome. And the benefit, I think, of being able to have donors from abroad is the choice. So we sometimes find in the UK that because we may not have the same ethnic matches that you're looking for or other specific criteria that you're looking for.
How much can you actually find out about the donor at the time that they're donating to you?
Not a huge amount, because under UK law, we're not allowed to, for example, give physical pictures of or photos of the donor to the recipients. It is an anonymous donation, so there will be obviously things like stature, height, skin color, eye color, physical characteristics that will allow you to get a very good match. But you won't get necessarily baby pictures of the donor. You'll usually have an idea of their profession and that sort of background. And donors are allowed to write a message to actually indicate why they are doing the donation, which, a nice message that I think is always, nice for people to be able to read. So it is a little bit more limited. If you looked at donation in the USA, for example, we don't have that, in the USA, donors can be paid large amounts of money. There can be far more information provided about the donor, but that's not what the UK regulatory system allows. In the UK, donation is totally altruistic, and the amount a donor is paid to give a donation is literally to cover their costs for traveling in and doing that donation, which is not much.
So, what process do people go through when they're actually selecting a donor? How does that work?
So the first thing is to have a discussion with the clinic you plan to work with. I mean, we would normally in a consultation talk about the process and ensure that you're given options for which donor banks you might want to look at. And all the donor banks normally require you to register to provide a certain amount of money or whatever it is for their registration, but that opens the door to looking at the various donors they have on their website. And then it's a bit of internet shopping, I'm afraid to say. There's not a lot of difference to internet shopping, but the donors that they have will be marked as donors suitable for import into the UK. They're normally marked as open donors. And within that, you should see information about the donor will have a code name, but there will be all the physical characteristics. And therefore, you need to decide which are the physical characteristics that are important to me or to us as a couple. And it might be that in a same-sex relationship, the person that is going to provide the egg will say, right, let's look at the partner's characteristics so that we have a little bit of our characteristics, that are mixed. in the child, or in a heterosexual couple, it's often the male characteristics that are chosen to try and get the closest match to the partner who has, not who's not got the sperm, and therefore that's why we're using the donor sperm. But it is a conversation. You can't get a perfect match, and we tend to advise people looking for donors to look at the 2 or 3 top characteristics to start with, and then everything else is kind of icing on the cake. So really to make sure they get the right match for them. A lot of like ours, a lot of clinics will have an egg donation or sperm donation, or egg and sperm donation coordinator, and that person helps to guide the patient to find the right choice. But we are not, as clinics, allowed to make that choice for you. That's a nice thing, because you retain that control of choice. We're there to guide and make sure that you choose a suitable sample. And another question that's often asked of us is, there are different levels of sperm motility, for example. And so you're choosing between one donor whose sperm motility is 10% and another one which is 20%. And that's when the clinics should be able to advise you, well, given your particular situation, you might be doing IVF, we would advise this particular donor. But that's about as far as we would go.
Do people have to have quite good quality sperm to be able to donate anyway?
Yes, they have to have good quality sperm. Motility is the only thing that sometimes you'll find variation once the sperm is frozen. There's a little bit of variation from one donor to the next, but to be selected as a donor, you would have to have normal sperm count and good quality, good morphology on the sperm.
You were talking earlier about the need to freeze the sperm as part of this process while you're doing all of the tests to make sure that it's okay. But is it less successful because you're using frozen sperm rather than fresh sperm, or does that not make a difference?
No, and frozen sperm is a lot safer. We haven't found a difference in terms of insemination treatments. Most clinics will quote to you that a single cycle of donor sperm insemination using frozen sperm with a healthy female partner would be around 15% plus. Obviously, slightly higher in younger women. 15% plus chance of a clinical pregnancy per cycle attempted of donor insemination in a natural cycle. And similarly with IVF, you'll get the highest results using donor sperm with IVF, because the sperm should be good quality and motile. Now, every now and then, you will thaw a sample of donor sperm, and it will be a donor who has got normal parameters, but has sperm that doesn't thaw well. It's simply one of those things. And occasionally, those are the cases where we would say insemination wouldn't be recommended. We'd recommend IVF, or even IVF where sperm is injected into the egg, which we call ICSI. These are small numbers of donor samples. Most of them should be fine for insemination and should be fine for IVF. And the choice between those 2 treatments should be based on other factors such as your preference, success rates, and obviously the person who's providing the egg, their fertility, and the number of eggs you've got. A very good example, for example, you've already had a child with a donor, and you did insemination. You come back 2 years later, and you've only got 2 samples of that donor left. We might say, be very careful, because insemination, your chances of success is about 15% per cycle. IVF might be 45%. So maybe you want to go for the IVF treatment to give you the highest chance, because you've only got 2 samples left. That might be how we choose.
And are there any legal matters that people need to be aware of when they're using donor sperm?
Yes, we obviously need to make sure that all the necessary consent forms have been completed by the donor, and likewise that the consent forms have been completed by the recipients of that donor sperm. A very good example would be in a same-sex female couple. We have legal parenthood forms that need to be signed before treatment starts, if you're not married or in a civil relationship, that ensures that the partner not providing the eggs is recognized as a legal parent at the time of birth of the child. So really, really important to have the consent forms done. And clinics are absolutely regulated on this, and they have to comply with all those consent forms.
Just one final question. Is there a real risk of not using a clinic? We know that lots of people find it quite expensive, and there is a temptation sometimes to go and find a donor online somewhere. But are there risks to doing that people should be aware of?
No, I think you shouldn't be tempted to do this cheaply at home. It's for me sad that donor sperm treatment isn't funded properly by the NHS, because there is automatically then a group of people who can't afford to go to a clinic, who are going to buy sperm online, who are going to ask friends. And of course, the difference will be that there is no proper screening carried out of the donor or of the donor sample. And you're putting yourself, you're going to be placing in your body material that may be risky for you, or potentially lead to a child that has health issues. So it's something that people do usually to save time and costs, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Carole, thank you so much for that really comprehensive introduction to using donor sperm. You can find other Q&As from the Fertility Alliance on our YouTube channel and more information on our website.